Hello and welcome to Renfrewshire Libraries in conversation with Football Heroes author Matt Oldfield. Hi Matt, let's kick off with Kevin De Bruyne. Now, not many people might know this, but Kevin De Bruyne, on the walls of his bedroom, who was the English club that he adored?
Well, yeah, so he was a Liverpool fan growing up, which, any Man City fans might not be so happy about that. But yeah, his grandfather was a big Liverpool fan, and actually the family lived in England for a while. So Kevin De Bruyne's mum kind of grew up, part of her childhood was spent in England, so they had that connection already. For whatever reason, I guess probably because at that point in time Liverpool were the best team in England, so they happened to support them. And Michael Owen, for growing up, Kevin De Bruyne was very much a fan of Michael Owen, which is interesting because I think with so many players, their heroes tend to play in a position that they then go on to play. But yeah, obviously De Bruyne is definitely not a striker, although I think when he was young he did play a bit more in that role, but over time obviously his kind of playmaker passing range was discovered, and suddenly you can't, if you can pass a ball like Kevin De Bruyne, you shouldn't be a striker.
Fabulous, Matt. So we're actually going to move on to the skills that De Bruyne has. Now, this was a focal point to the Belgian FA looking to Project Restart. It was Project 2000 they were looking at to adapt the tactics of Belgian football to more attacking.
Yeah, so I think a lot of those national teams around that time were looking to kind of, how can we create a better next generation of players? So like Germany did it as well. But for Belgium, yeah, they'd had good players in the past, but they'd never really gone on to achieve much. But suddenly, they had a plan in place, and they just had a very talented group of young players. So you've got players like Romelu Lukaku, Eden Hazard, and they actually looked after these players and brought them into a kind of central group of young talented players who were coached. There was a proper coaching system in place, and that allowed these players to grow and develop together. And then obviously this had an amazing impact on the Belgian national team, because suddenly in recent tournaments they've been much better. They got to the semi-finals of the World Cup, and they'll be one of the top teams for the next year's Euros as well as Scotland, of course.
Fabulous. Well, De Bruyne is obviously a Red Devil for Belgium, but he's a Manchester City player. But prior to that, De Bruyne had a bit of a career veering back and forth between the Premier League in England and the Bundesliga in Germany. Yeah,
so he was one of the many players that Chelsea signed over the years, who didn't quite sort of settle in London and was sent off on loan. So he ended up going to Germany, where he was absolutely incredible. And so I guess it's a strength of character thing again, in the sense that he was a young player who thought he'd kind of achieved his dream of coming to England, but he just wasn't getting game time for Chelsea. But instead of giving up and moaning about it, he went off to Germany, showed what he could really do, and ended up getting this massive move back to England to play for Manchester City, and where he's won league titles and turned himself into one of the best players in the world.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Matt. So the final whistle has blown. So thanks, Matt, for sharing an insight into the research, writing and story of Kevin De Bruyne.